Welcome to the Peer Mentor Student Success Strategy Workshop. Today our workshop is going to focus on a textbook study reading strategy called SQ3R. And we call it a textbook study strategy because you will be learning how to read and study your textbook at the same time. Normally students take their textbooks and read them how they've been taught to read, starting at the first page, looking at the first word, and reading, and getting to the end of the chapter and realizing they don't really remember much of it, and trying to come back and reread it then again for a midterm or a final. Not very efficient. So this is a very efficient and flexible and effective technique, and hopefully you will find that it works. If you use it, it will. So we're going to begin and we're going to talk about SQ3R. I am Melanie Haeri and I teach reading here at IVC. So, textbook reading challenges. Most people do not like reading textbooks. Is this true? We can think of so many reasons why we don't like to, and mostly it's because it's difficult and we feel we're using a lot of time and not getting much out of it. Part of the problem comes from how we learn to read. As young people, we learn to read from narratives, right? When you're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you're given a storybook to read. And the first books that are read to you are stories. When we learn to read those, we learn to predict those patterns. We know what's coming in the textbook, right? We know there's going to be a character, and there might be more than one character. We know there'll be a plot, something will be an issue, there'll be a crisis, there'll be a setting of some kind, and then at the end there'll be a solution. And as we learn to read, we learn to predict and make predictions about what's coming next in stories. You can remember in your lower grades when a teacher would read, he or she would stop and say, well, what do you think's coming next? And students like you would predict what was coming next because you knew the pattern. They were characters, they encountered a problem, they had to solve the problem, and then there was an ending. Well, somewhere along the line you were given a textbook to read, sometimes in the elementary years or junior high or high school, and you were given the book and you were told read the book. And so your brain looked for that pattern. You went to begin reading at the first word and your brain was looking for that pattern. But that pattern is not in a textbook, is it? And so it becomes very frustrating as you're reading the textbook and you're not finding really cool characters or a crisis that has to be resolved or a setting that you can picture. It seems like just page after page of words. And how do I possibly get through all of this? How do I remember all of this? So this strategy is to help you set a pattern in your mind for reading a textbook. There is a pattern. You just haven't been shown the pattern. So what I like to talk about first is some of the challenges we face when we read textbooks, because there are a lot. And I think you might agree with some of these. Takes too long to read, hours and hours, and if you ever are having trouble sleeping, it's very easy to pick up a textbook and in no time at all you're fast asleep. Well, how do I remember a whole chapter? How can they expect me to take 60 pages of words that I don't even know what they mean? Now I have to read it and I have to remember that? That's not humanly possible. Do you agree so far? Yes. Taking notes, right? When we're feeling very studious, we have our yellow highlighter and we take notes from the chapter. But I recopied the whole chapter. Is that what happens? Try and take notes and we end up copying the whole chapter over because it's hard to know. What do I leave out? What do I leave in? And that's not very efficient, and that doesn't help you with time or with studying. And then comes the test. So you read that chapter, you highlight in yellow, you take notes, you spend all those hours, you come back before midterm and you read the chapter again, and then you take the test and it doesn't feel like they match. Then you're mad. That didn't even match. That's not fair. That's a bad teacher. That's a bad textbook. That's a terrible test. That's not fair. Boring. Why does it feel boring? Part of why it feels boring is because it's new. A lot of it is new information. A lot of it is very factual information, and we have to learn it. it's not an exciting story with a plot. So we have to learn how to make it not boring. One of the biggest challenges, I think, of reading textbooks is sometimes it's very difficult to understand. Lots of big words, lots of new words. The information is all new. So your challenge in reading a textbook is not just to read it, right? Your job is to read it, understand the new information, learn it, remember it, and then take a test on it. That's a very different task than you might have had when you read a story. It's easier to remember when you have a pattern and it's just a story. So SQ3R will help you address all of these issues. Most students come up with a way to work around textbooks, right? Because nobody might have taught you how to read a textbook using a strategy or teaching you how to address the challenges of reading a textbook. You've had to muddle through them, right? That's why you're in college. And we come up with ways and we figure out through trial and error. And there are more than one there are many strategies actually for reading a textbook. But no matter what strategy you choose, it needs to have 3 stages. I call them the 3 must-haves. If your strategy does not have these 3 things in it, it's not a good one. Okay? Kind of like going to Consumer Reports when you're looking to buy something, and it said, as long as it meets these criteria, it's good to go. So these are the 3 must-haves. And when you look at these, you'll realize that for the most part, students are maybe doing one of these right now. Okay? It should have a preview stage. That means a stage in the strategy where you preview the material. And we're going to talk about today how to do that and why we do that. But every textbook reading strategy that's effective will have a preview stage. It will also have a stage where you have to actually read the information, right? There's no strategy that says you can skip reading. Don't buy that one. And integrate the new knowledge with old knowledge that you already have. So the strategy will show you how to take all that new information and connect it and integrate it into what you already know, which will help with long-term memory. Okay? And finally, it should have a recall and a self-testing stage within it, right? So most students read the textbook, close it, and go take the test. And then, well, I thought I knew it. How many of you have said that? I thought I knew it. We have to take responsibility and know if we knew it. And if you don't know it, that's when you can ask your instructors and you can go to office hours and you can participate in the lectures, but you will know which parts you know and which parts you don't know. And that's very effective in mastering the material that's in the textbook. You need to know which parts you know and which you don't. So any good reading strategy will have those parts. If you look at those 3 right now and you think about in your mind how you read a textbook chapter right now, you probably have one of those. The middle one, probably, half of it. And you'll soon see why that's not working. And it's not because you don't know how to read a textbook. It's a different skill than reading a story. And perhaps nobody taught you that. I like to use the analogy of cutting hair. Most of you know how to use a scissors. Raise your hand if you know how to cut paper with a scissors. Well, that looks like everybody. Excellent. That was kindergarten, right? Something like that. Preschool, maybe. If I handed you a professional salon scissors and said, could you please cut my hair? Or can I cut your hair? What would be your response? No. Well, don't you know how to cut hair? I mean, don't you know how to use a scissors? You've been using a scissors since preschool, right? Why is it harder to cut hair than cut paper? It's a different skill, right? It's taking the same tool and using it in a different application. So reading or sounding out the words or comprehending a message is your tool. But using it on a novel or a story is different to using it on a textbook. So in essence today, SQ3R is going to show you how to cut hair, right? You're going to learn how to read a textbook by knowing what the how to use the tool for the new strategy. So those are the 3 must-haves. And of course, SQ3R, the strategy I'm going to teach you today, fits the bill. It has all 3 of those stages in it. It has the 3 must-haves. It has a preview stage, a read and integrate knowledge stage, and a recall and self-testing stage. In fact, SQ3R actually has 2 parts to the preview stage and 2 parts to the recall stage. So I really like it. Really like this one. It was actually developed, I believe, in the 1940s at a college that taught teachers. So it's been around a long time and it works. What does SQ3R stand for? S stands for survey. And survey is another word for preview. When you think of previewing, you think about reading something, looking at something ahead, reading it, looking at it, looking how long it is, looking at things before you actually read it. When you buy a magazine, do you preview it first? I bet you do. You know, when you go into the store and you're buying a magazine, you look to see what articles are in there, what the pictures are, how long it is. Have I read it before? Are there enough interesting articles for me to buy it? That's previewing. You're looking at what's involved, what's in there, and if you really want to read it. Sometimes we preview novels, right? We read what's written on the back, we read the jacket cover, we look at the title, we see how long it is, are there pictures, right? That's all previewing. What previewing does is it helps establish in your brain an idea and a map of what the chapter looks like. We already know it's not going to have the same pattern as a story. It's not going to have characters, you know, a setting, a plot, a crisis, and a conclusion. So we need to let our brain know what the map looks like. What does the pattern look like? So previewing the textbook will show you that, and that's what survey is. And I will give you more details in a moment. Q is for question. Q sets up and is still in the preview stage, but based on your survey, you're going to ask yourself some questions. And this is the part that's supposed to help make it not so boring. You are going to ask some questions that you want answered when you are done with this chapter. It gives you something to look for when you're reading, and it helps establish some interest in the chapter. Okay? The first R, there are 3 R's. That's what the 3R means. The first R is read. But do you notice that that is the 3rd step, not the 1st step? Do you notice? In the read portion of the strategy, you will be reading the textbook, and I'm going to in detail explain to you what to do while you're reading it. Because reading it like it's a storybook doesn't work. And I know another way that doesn't work. How many of you, when you're reading a textbook, take out your yellow highlighter or your pencil and sit down and mark things up as you read, right? But part of the problem is, as we read and we highlight because something seems important, right? That's important, and we highlight it. And then what happens? We go to the next line, and what do we say? Oh, wait, no, that's important. So we make that yellow. And then we get to the next line, and oh, wait, that's important too. And by the end of the chapter, we have a yellow chapter. And so it's not very helpful. So I am going to, when I explain this step in the strategy, tell you how to annotate effectively, how to use your yellow highlighter and maybe other colors or a pencil, but to make meaningful marks, not just yellow, because it's important. The next R is recite. Recite means to say back or to memorize. This is the part where you're studying, where you're learning, where you're repeating back to yourself, where you're testing. We have now entered the self-testing and recall stage. Okay? This is where you quiz yourself. What's kind of interesting to know is they found in research that if you would like to learn something and take it from your short-term memory and put it into your long-term memory, right? Not just remember it for 2 minutes, but be able to remember it for your midterm in 3 weeks or in a few months, then you need to incorporate as many of your 5 senses as possible. Your 5 senses are your data input areas for your brain. The way we get information into our brain is through our 5 senses: hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. So the more of those you can use when you're learning something, the more likely it is to go into your long-term memory. So when we are reciting, one of the suggestions is to recite out loud so you can hear the material and use your sense of hearing. Most students just read a textbook silently, and that is only one sense. If you can recite out loud, you've now added a second. And the taking notes, which I'm going to help you with as well, makes it the third sense. It's the sense of touch. Okay? And finally, the last R is review. You have to review. You have to go back and not only self-test yourself, but review repeatedly to make sure you understand it and to remember it. And repetition also leads to long-term memory. So the 5 parts of SQ3R: survey, question, read, recite, review. Survey and question, that goes with the preview stage. Reading goes with the reading stage, right? And recite and review goes with the testing and self-testing and recall stage. Okay? So let's take a look at each of those steps in a little bit more detail. We are now in the pre-reading stage, which is the preview stage. And as I mentioned before, survey and question are the 2 parts that will fit in this section. Survey means the same as preview. So what are some ways you can preview a chapter before you read it? Suggestions include looking at the very first page of a chapter. The great thing about textbooks, now that we've talked about how difficult and challenging they are, one of the wonderful things about textbooks and the way they're written is authors organize the material in a very structured way. And if you can start to see the structure and how the ideas are connected in a chapter, you'll start to see the chapters in a bigger picture than just 60 pages of individual words and sentences, which becomes overwhelming. So when we survey the chapter, if we start on the very first page, a lot of authors now will list objectives for the chapter, or here's what's coming, or learning goals for the chapter, right? And in a way, that's an outline for you of what the most important concepts are in a chapter. Sometimes it's only 4 or 5 things. That's a great place to start because you can let your brain know right away, let's be looking for these things when we're reading. We're not looking for a plot, we're not looking for a great drama, but we're going to look for these 4 or 5 or 6 concepts. These are the things I need to know. Some other things you can look at when you're surveying is you can look at the pictures, the graphs. You can look at how it's structured, the bolded sections, the subsections. You can look at the chapter questions at the end. You can look at the summary. The great thing about surveying, they found, if you preview something before you read it, it has been shown in research that you can double your speed and your comprehension just by previewing. Because what you've done is, instead of opening to a chapter and not knowing what's coming, you don't know any of the words, you don't know any of the concepts, you don't know how it's organized, you're just reading, not knowing what's coming next. You're spending most of your time trying to figure out what's coming next, and you're not absorbing it. When you have an understanding of the chapter before you read it, now you're just filling in those concepts. So you read faster, and you can double your speed and improve your comprehension. When you do a survey, look through the whole chapter. See how many pages it is. You can even plan your reading time. You don't have to read all 60 pages in one shot, right? That's how we do it, though, isn't it? That's why it's so boring. But if you have a plan and a strategy and you're going to take it one section at a time, and you know there are 4 major sections in the chapter because you learned that in your preview, you can do one section a day, and you can really manage your time and manage the chapter more effectively. It should not take you more than 3 to 5 minutes. This is not a big time investment, is it? We sometimes spend 3 to 5 minutes before we read a chapter just gearing up to read the chapter, putting our pencils out, maybe getting another drink of water, quickly checking our text messages again, stretching, right? If we can spend 3 to 5 minutes previewing the chapter, it can make an incredibly big difference in your speed and your comprehension. Chapter objectives are a great place to start. Look at what the author wants you to know at the end of the chapter. The textbook author or authors are not trying to hide things from you. I know it feels like it sometimes. It's not a mystery. They really want you to understand the information. So they're going to set it up in the best, most organized way they can. Chapter objectives are a great way to see the overall goal of the chapter. Chapters are usually broken up into subsections or sections, right? And there's headings. And if you pay attention to those, you can get kind of an X-ray of the chapter, right? The bigger structure of the chapter. And when you look at a chapter, realize all the information in one chapter is connected, or it wouldn't be in the same chapter. So if you can understand how they're all related in that chapter, you can understand the boundaries of what you need to know in that chapter, because it's all connected. Okay? Look at all the maps, the charts, the tables, the graphs, the pictures. That's the fun part. Right? We like books with pictures. It's very visual, especially if you're a visual learner. You may not understand the charts or the maps or the graphs at first, but take a look at them. It allows your brain to see what's coming next. It allows you to maybe be excited about what you're about to learn. Look at any vocabulary words or concepts that are bold or italicized or underlined or in a different color or in a list. These are keywords that you need to understand the concepts of the chapter. And finally, you can look at the summary at the end of a chapter. Sometimes the author will summarize the chapter at the end. It's usually in a paragraph. That's also a great way to get an overview of what you're about to read. You now, if you look at all these things, you have a really good idea before you ever start reading what's coming. And what a preview often does, it often shows us some things we already know. Hey, I know that word. I've heard of that concept before. Oh, I've seen this graph before. Oh, this reminds me of what we studied last semester in this class. You can start to make connections. And when we can attach new information to old information, it goes in our long-term memory. So it's really good to make those connections. And the chapter questions. This is not cheating, right? Remember in high school? Don't look at the questions first. No, you can look at the questions. In fact, the questions should represent the important concepts, again, that you should know. So if you read those in advance, there's more things for you to look at. If you preview and you look at all these things, now you can think about things that you want to find when you're reading, and maybe even be excited about it. We're going to move on to the second part of the preview phase, which is question. Once you've done your preview, you're going to ask yourself, if I have to read this chapter, what are 5 things I want to know when I'm done? You're going to set for yourself some objectives. This helps engage you with the chapter. This maybe prevents you from falling asleep reading the chapter, maybe. And it also allows you to start connecting to what you're reading. Because if you feel that there's something of value for you to learn from this chapter personally, you're more likely to focus and concentrate better and remember it. So this is the part where you just take a couple of minutes and jot down 5 things. Well, if I'm going to read this chapter, here are 5 things I want to know. You can use the section headings, you can use titles, the visuals, the vocabulary, any of those to create the questions. I want to know, what does this picture mean? Why do they have a picture of an owl in a calculus chapter. That doesn't make sense. I'm making it up, but that could be, right? Maybe it's something that caught your interest. Maybe it was a word. Maybe they're in a science book, they had a picture of an experiment that looked kind of cool. Or in a psychology textbook, a really interesting picture that caught your attention. Sometimes it's a title that maybe the author uses humor. If you look carefully, some textbooks actually do have some humor, sometimes. So this is your chance to have a reason to read the chapter. Okay? Any questions so far? And we haven't even started to read the chapter yet, have we? Okay. Do you see how much more there is than to just opening up the chapter? And do you see why that might not have worked right away? Why this might work better? Okay. So we have SQ, and now we go to the 3 R's. So we're leaving the preview phase, which had survey and question, and now we're going on to the read phase. So while you're reading the chapter, there's several things you can do to make it efficient and to make it effective. Well, you have to read the chapter. If somebody tells you, I have a strategy for you, a study reading strategy for textbooks where you don't have to read it, don't buy it. When you're done, you're going to recite what you've learned. Okay, so let's look at reading. When we use the yellow highlighter, that famous yellow highlighter, or our pencil, what we're doing is called annotating. That's the fancy word for marking up your textbook. Okay? It also means writing in the margins and making marks and questions as you read. Okay? And what I'd like you to learn from the strategy is how to annotate with meaning. Mostly when we highlight, we realize we have to mark things that are important. But we're having a tough time usually deciding what is important and what isn't. So we end up, as we read, highlighting. Oh, that's a date. That must be important. That's somebody's name. That's important. That's a vocabulary word. That's important. But by the time we're done, everything's yellow. And if we come back to the chapter, we don't even remember why we made it yellow. And we just have to reread it again. So when you annotate, you want to annotate with meaning. This is a very creative part, and you create your own marking system. And your handout has some examples in there. The idea of the markings is you can use colors or you can use symbols. But what you're going to do is come up with a key of marks or colors that you're going to annotate with, but they're going to represent why you're annotating it. Why is it important? Not just it's an important fact, but why is it important? Is it important because it's a vocabulary word? That should have 1 mark. Maybe you circle vocabulary words. Is it important because it's a definition? Maybe you underline the definition and write DEF next to it. Is it important because the author is giving you examples of a bigger concept? Maybe you want to number those examples and write EX next to them. Is it important because it's the main idea of a section? Maybe that has to have a red star, and that gets the yellow, because that's the main idea. Is it important because it is supporting details? It is supporting information that supports or proves the main idea that the author is talking about. Then that gets a different mark. Is it important because it's one of the objectives of the chapter? Is it the heading? So what you get to do is you get to come up with a series of marks that show why you're highlighting. If it's a main idea, supporting details, vocabulary, examples, definitions, all of those different items. So that when you come back and look at a chapter that you've annotated, you can immediately pick out all the main ideas because you have your key. And in your key, main idea, any main idea from the chapter is in yellow. And you know where all the vocabulary words are because they're all circled in blue. And you know where the definitions to those words are Because sometimes they're not right next to the word, but you've written DEF next to them. Okay? You come up with your own marking system and you use it in all your textbooks, it will become automatic. And you'll start to associate yellow with only main ideas. So you could at any point go back and pull that information. So that's the creative part. And in your handout, there's a list of different marks and symbols that you can use. You can use colors. You can just use a pencil if you're not wanting to mark up your book and just erase it at the end of the semester. That could be a lot. Here's the key to this, though. If you have to mark it with meaning, that is, if you have to mark something, a main idea, or a vocabulary word, or a supporting detail, or an example, that means when you're reading it, you have to know that's what it is before you mark it. Right? So you can't mark at the same time that you're reading it for the first time, because you don't know until you finish a paragraph or a passage what that main idea is. You're going to have to read the whole paragraph or passage and then digest it. What is the topic of this? What is the main idea? What is it the author wants me to know in this section? What are all the examples pointing to? Are there definitions? That's the study part. That's the part where you have to learn the information in order to mark it up correctly. That takes time. But guess what? That's the studying. That's the studying. It's happening at the same time. So you read a section or a paragraph, you understand it, and then you annotate it. Then you mark it up. Does that make sense? Does this take a long time? Yes. Is it worth it? Yes. Also, ask questions as you read. Interact with your reading. Research has shown that effective readers of college textbooks or any reading ask questions the whole time they're reading. They're monitoring their comprehension and asking questions the whole time, and sometimes answering them. Okay? Well, I don't know, why did they put this here? Put a question mark. Well, wait a minute, didn't they just say this over here? How are these two related? Draw a line. Ask yourself the chapter questions. Look at your questions that you came up with before you read the chapter. Look at the chapter objectives and see if you can find that information as you're reading it. As I mentioned before, connect the new information to the old information. Relate to what you're reading. Oh, this reminds me of. Oh, in my other science class, we talked about this concept, but how it related to plants. Now I see how that's related to animals. Make connections. It will store in your long-term memory. Please write in the margins. Write all over your books. Remember when we were told never to write in a book? That's really bad. But your textbooks, especially in college, your textbooks are your tools. These are your tools for reading. Your instructor expects you to read your book. Sometimes students get frustrated and they say, well, nothing the teacher says in the class matches what's in the textbook. Or they say, I don't know which is going to be on the test. How do I know? Well, most of the time, instructors assign a textbook reading or some kind of textual reading because they don't have time to tell you all of that information in the short lecture time. Or maybe they're presenting you with another expert's perspective. And most of us, given enough time, we could tell you all of that because that's what we like to do. But we don't have enough time. So it's your job to read and learn from the textbook. It is your tool. Back to the hair cutting analogy. If you are going to learn how to cut hair and you have to buy the tools for that, but expensive fancy scissors, and you showed up to beauty school and said, great, I'm just going to go ahead and watch. Yeah, I'm not going to use my scissors because I'm going to sell it back at the end. That wouldn't work, would it? If somebody was going to dental school and they had an expensive drill, and they said, you know, I'm going to go ahead and watch you drill. I'm not going to drill because I'm going to sell it back at the end. It seems silly. So you have to see your textbook in a new way. It is your tool. It is your learning tool. Write all over it. Mark it up. Pages should look well used. They will buy it back with all of that in there, I promise. So use your textbook as a tool. Learn from it. It is a supplement to your teacher. Okay? See relationships and make connections between the sections of a chapter and the chapters in a book. They're all in the same book because they're all connected, all the chapters. And everything in one chapter is in that chapter because they're connected. Okay? If you can see the connections, you don't have to memorize 60 pages of details. You can look at the relationships and the connections. Any questions? So we've done survey, question, read, and we're going on to our second R, which is recite. And this is the memorizing part. Remember, you've already read the chapter, and you've read it and marked it up as you've read and understood it. So you've done some studying already. Recite out loud. You can do it after each section. You can wait till the end of the chapter and go back section by section, paragraph by paragraph. But you now can look through and say, hey, I'm going to find all the vocabulary words first. And those are easy to find because you have one mark for vocabulary words. Maybe it's a yellow circle or a red squiggly line or an orange highlight. But you can easily pick out those words and the definitions. You can read them, you can close the book, and then you can recite them out loud. You can also write them and practice. You can also find all the main ideas because they're all going to be yellow or have the double squiggly red lines underneath them. And you can see if you can look at a section of a chapter and recite all the main ideas out of that section. Okay, so this is the recite part. You can also recite by writing if you're uncomfortable speaking out loud by yourself. Or you can invite a poor unsuspecting relative or friend and sit them down and recite to them. The best way to learn something is to teach it. You can also take this time now to make notes. Remember, we talked about that in the beginning, that you really enjoy taking notes from a chapter. We feel very efficient when we're doing that, but we're learning because we're writing it. But the problem with it is we recopy the whole chapter. So, but guess what? If you annotate really well, look how much easier note-taking is going to be. All your main ideas are highlighted or marked in one color. Your examples are listed in a different way or maybe numbered. Your vocabulary words stick out. You've got possibly definitions that you've got with a different mark. You've got the sections marked off. You can take that now and you can pull that skeleton that you've sort of drawn over the chapter, right, and make your notes. And you'll know what to leave out. Because all you need are the headings, the main ideas, some of the examples, and the definitions and the words, right? You can use notes in several ways from this. And sometimes students match it to the type of material. Sometimes students have a favorite that they use on every textbook. Sometimes they mix them up. Some of the choices are an outline, right? You know how an outline works. Roman numerals, big sections, smaller numbers for the subsections. Chapters are are set up to do that very easily, right? You can look at the structure of a chapter and easily make an outline. You can also do Cornell notes if you know how to use Cornell notes, where on the paper's folded, and on one side you have the concepts, the questions, the vocabulary words, the main ideas, and on the other side you have the definitions, the answers to the questions, the examples, all of those things. And you can write them that way and fold it and test yourself. Okay. And you can also map, and in your handout there's some examples. You can use mind maps or brainstorming maps, where you can, especially if you're a visual learner, you can draw a bubble and put every main concept in its own bubble with the supporting details coming out of it. You can draw a map like that of the whole chapter and then do each subsection, right? It's a great way to see visually how ideas are connected, okay? And some texts work better for mapping and flowcharts, and some work better for outlines. And some people just have a preference. So you've got all of those options. You can recite after each section, Or you can wait till you've done the whole chapter and then start reciting. It's suggested that you recite a little bit at a time, though, to start the process of getting it into your long-term memory. Okay? So now we've done survey, question, read, recite, and next is review. Very good. This is part of the self-testing and recall stage. When this strategy was written, they recommended that you look over the material after 24 hours and then every few days. So let's propose for a moment that you are using the strategy, and let's say for your psychology textbook. And you have made notes for each chapter. Maybe you've got Cornell notes for each chapter. Maybe some are mapped, some are outlines. But by doing good annotating, your notes are probably not more than 2 or 3 pages for a chapter, right? And so now when it comes to reviewing, all you have to do is pick up that chapter, those 2 or 3 pages, and review the concepts and the vocabulary words. And you know you haven't left anything out because you studied it while you made the notes. Okay? And when you're reviewing, it's 10 minutes. You're just going over those notes again because you've already had done the studying when you read it, and you've been reciting it. So now you're reviewing. Now you've got a midterm coming up. Oh no, the dreaded midterm. And you have 6 chapters you have to know. Well, do you have to go back and read those 6 chapters again? No. You never have to look at them again. You just pull out your notes for each of the chapters and you review. You will be the calm one at the study session. In fact, you may leave the midterm study session when everybody's in full-blown panic and still complaining about having to reread chapters, and you would have already finished reviewing and off to the movies, right? Because you've done all your studying in advance and as you've read, right? Seems really good, doesn't it? Almost like it should be an infomercial. Only 3 easy payments, $9.99. But it does work. It only works, though, if you use it. It's like anything else. Here are the benefits. It does take time. I'm not going to deny that. It takes a long time to read a chapter and study it at the same time. But in the end, you've saved a lot of time. You're not rereading chapters. You're not trying to still learn material. You're not sitting without any information after spending 4 hours reading a chapter. Imagine going to a lecture after reading a chapter like that. Imagine now you can say, I have these questions. I put question marks in these 4 parts that I need answered in the lecture. The lecture will be a little bit more interesting, and you'll know which parts you need to ask questions on. Visiting your professor in their office hours will be a lot better when you visit, and instead of saying, professor says, how can I help you? And you go, chapter 3, I don't get it. And the professor says, what don't you get? And you do this. The whole chapter. Very hard for them to help you, but if you can open up your textbook and say, well, I don't understand this concept, and I'm not sure how it relates to that graph over there. Wow, now you've got real learning happening. You can ask a question that can be really answered. So in the end, it does save time, and you're much more efficient. It also helps you understand what you know and what you don't know. This helps you monitor your comprehension and your learning. You know, in college, that's your responsibility now. There's a fancy word for it. It's called metacognition. But it means now that you are aware when you're understanding something and when you're not. The I thought I knew it doesn't really work anymore. Midterms and finals, now that just becomes, instead of a really stressful time, it becomes a review process. And there's so much going on during midterms and finals, it's very hard to reread every single chapter in every class again. So you will take away a lot of stress by doing this. The strategy combines reading and studying in one. So yes, it takes a long time, but you're much more efficient, right? Efficient means getting more out of your time. Like an efficient car, right? More miles for the tank of gas. This is like the Prius of studying. It's very efficient. That is our presentation on SQ3R, an efficient and effective study technique. You have in front of you a handout with lots of examples of mapping and annotating and a review of the strategy to help you. And I hope you use it, and thank you for attending our